There's a sentence that appears in fighting games every few years. It shows up when a new game drops, when early majors happen, when someone looks untouchable before the rest of the scene feels ready. Competitive integrity is a joke. It sounds definitive, it sounds righteous, it sounds like a conclusion, but most of the time it isn't one. Most of the time, that sentence isn't identifying a real breach of integrity at all. It's describing discomfort, confusion, and the shock of watching someone operate with certainty while everyone else is still guessing. I've seen this argument from every side. As a competitor, as a tester, as someone involved early, as someone accused of cheating, and as someone who lost to advantages that were real. So instead of arguing whether early access is fair or unfair, I want to talk about something more precise. What kinds of advantage actually exist, which ones fade on their own, which ones feel unfair but aren't cheating, and which ones genuinely break competitive integrity. Because not all advantages are the same. And the reason this argument never ends is because the FGC keeps treating them as if they are. Most debates collapse everything into one word: access. Early access, tester access, arcade access, insider access, but access is not one thing. There are different categories of advantage, and each produces a very different competitive outcome. When people don't separate them, they stop analyzing and start reacting. That's how this debate becomes emotional instead of accurate. This is the form of access people imagine as powerful, but which almost never is. Early testing usually means constantly changing builds, incomplete systems, characters adjusted repeatedly, mechanics added, removed, or altered. You're not mastering anything, you're reacting. Early involvement doesn't mean you're practicing a finished game. It means you're dealing with volatility. Nothing locks in, muscle memory resets, matchups don't stabilize, strategies don't last. Knowledge without stability does not convert cleanly into tournament success. It creates familiarity, not mastery. And familiarity alone does not win majors. From the outside, early testing looks like secret preparation. From the inside, it's often noise. That's why most early testers do not dominate once a game actually releases. This category produces minimal competitive advantage, even though it attracts the most suspicion. This is where things start to feel uncomfortable. When a game finally launches, the rules stop changing daily. Characters finally exist in the form that matters. Now, knowledge can stick. But what creates the advantage here isn't secret information, it's matchup scarcity. In other fighting games, practice modes were limited. You couldn't recreate layered situations, you couldn't force specific responses, you couldn't isolate decision trees. If you didn't understand a matchup, you couldn't manufacture that understanding alone. You needed another person. So when someone showed up early with refined strategies, they didn't win because the game was broken. They won because no one else had answers yet. Not because answers didn't exist, but because the tools and exposure required to find them were limited. This kind of advantage is real. It can win early events, it can look overwhelming, but it has a defining trait: it decays naturally. Once exposure spreads, once players see the character, once understanding diffuses, the advantage fades. And here's the part people forget: many early strategies still hold up years later because they weren't gimmicks, they were structurally sound ideas discovered early. Early dominance does not equal illegitimacy, sometimes it just means someone arrived first. Context matters. In older eras, the distance between knowing and doing was enormous. If you didn't understand a character, you couldn't lab your way to clarity overnight. You needed time, you needed repetition, you needed exposure. So early mastery looked supernatural, not because it was unfair, but because the learning curve was steep. Every fighting game era goes through this phase, and every era reacts to it the same way. For a long time, some regions had arcades, others didn't, and that mattered. Arcade access provided daily human competition, constant matchup exposure, real time adaptation, pressure based learning. Meanwhile, console only regions dealt with smaller player pools, less matchup variety, weaker training tools. Was this unfair? In outcome, yes. Was it cheating? No. This was environmental advantage, not deception. People often say, well, anyone could have traveled. That's a theoretical argument, not a practical one. Money, time, visas, infrastructure, these things matter. Access that exists on paper but not in reality still creates imbalance. Arcade players weren't playing a different game, they were playing the same game earlier more often and against more people. That advantage was real, and once consoles, online play, and modern tools matured, it faded. Just like launch window advantage fades. This is another form of access that sits between early testing and insider knowledge. Unauthorized offline builds. This happens when beta versions are cracked after being taken offline, allowing private unlimited practice while the public cannot play. This is different from normal early access. It isn't shared, it isn't time boxed, it isn't constrained by events. What creates the advantage here is unrestricted repetition and isolation. Players aren't just familiar, they're rehearsed. They arrive at release executing polished sequences while others are still orienting themselves. This is a real and unfair short-term advantage, but even this has a limit. It front-loads performance, but it does not guarantee long-term dominance. Once the game releases publicly, once matchmaking exists, once exposure spreads, the gap begins to close. So again, the advantage is real, but it still decays. This is the category people misunderstand the most. Some players adapt faster, not because they have more access, but because they already understand how fighting games work. They understand risk, priority, space, tempo, win conditions. When a new game releases, they aren't learning fighting games. They're mapping familiar ideas onto a new rule set. If the game aligns with their philosophy, they accelerate faster than others. That isn't cheating, that's transfer of understanding. This is why some players look unfair early, even when they didn't grind more than anyone else. They aren't guessing, they're testing assumptions, and if someone's still searching for answers, clarity looks suspicious. Now we reach a line that matters. There is one kind of advantage that does not decay, one that does not disappear with exposure, one that refreshes itself. Asymmetric information during live competition. This is not early access, this is not launch familiarity, this is not environmental advantage. This is knowing tomorrow's version while others play today's. When competitors have advanced knowledge of changes, when they can practice against future states, when information is not shared evenly once competition begins, that is where integrity actually breaks. Not because someone is skilled, not because someone prepared, but because the playing field no longer exists in the same time. That distinction is what most debates never reach. Because the emotional experience never changes. Watching someone play with certainty while you feel uncertain feels unfair. But fairness isn't about equal time. It's about equal information once competition begins. Most of the time, that condition is met faster than people realize, and when it isn't, that's where scrutiny belongs. The illusion isn't learning, it's advantage. People confuse early arrival with dominance, familiarity with mastery, preparation with cheating, and discomfort with injustice. That confusion is why this argument repeats every generation. Competitive integrity isn't broken because someone touched the game first. It isn't broken because someone adapted faster, and it isn't broken because preparation feels unfair to people who don't understand it yet. It breaks when information stops being shared evenly once competition begins. And most players never learn to tell the difference, not because they can't, but because no one ever teaches them how to see it. That gap between what players feel and what's actually happening is where frustration lives. And until you understand why advantage appears, it will always feel like cheating, even when it isn't.